Welcome back to Things I Know Nothing About, the podcast, where we dive headfirst into topics we initially know very little about, hoping to emerge slightly less ignorant today. We're tackling a genuinely hot button issue that has sparked what I can only describe as a full blown internet food fight: seed oils.
Oh, Alex, this is one of those topics that sends the comment sections into absolute chaos, isn't it? On one side, you have health influencers vehemently declaring seed oils toxic and inflammatory, and on the other, nutrition scientists are practically pulling their hair out trying to defend them. It's a true modern dietary dilemma.
It really is. And it's not just a casual disagreement, it's a deeply entrenched debate. We're talking about oils like canola, soybean, and sunflower, which are staples in so many kitchens and processed foods. The stakes feel high for people trying to make informed health choices, and the misinformation can be overwhelming.
Absolutely. The critics often referring to these as the hateful eight, which include canola, corn, cottonseed, grapeseed, soybean, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran oils, advocate strongly for a return to what they call traditional fats like butter and beef tallow. They claim these modern seed oils are highly processed and unnatural, leading to all sorts of chronic diseases.
And when they talk about industrial processing, they often bring up things like chemical solvents, specifically hexane and the high heat involved. The argument is that these methods degrade the oils, create harmful byproducts, and even generate trans fats, stripping away any potential nutritional value in the process. It's a very compelling narrative for someone looking for a clear villain in their diet.
It definitely is, and it resonates with a desire for natural and unprocessed foods, which is understandable. However, nutrition scientists and public health organizations often respond with a collective sigh, pointing out that there's decades of research supporting the health benefits of consuming many of these seed oils, especially when they replace saturated fats in the diet. They argue that the negative rhetoric frequently misrepresents or oversimplifies complex lipid science.
So essentially, we have two very different narratives, both presented with conviction. One of the core scientific points of contention, and probably the most frequently cited by the anti seed oil camp, revolves around omega 6 fatty acids and their role in inflammation. Seed oils are indeed rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, with linoleic acid, or LA, being the most common omega 6.
Yes, and this is where it gets really complex. Both omega 6 and omega 3 fatty acids are essential, meaning our bodies can't produce them, so we have to get them from our diet. The critics argue that our modern Western diets have a massively skewed omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, sometimes as high as 10 to 1 or even 20 to 1, compared to an estimated evolutionary ratio of maybe 1 to 1 to 4 to 1. They suggest this imbalance promotes chronic low-grade inflammation, which is then linked to a host of diseases.
That's the crux of their argument, right? The idea that linoleic acid, the omega 6, converts into arachidonic acid, which then leads to pro inflammatory compounds. It sounds very logical on the surface, connecting a common dietary component directly to a pervasive health issue like chronic inflammation, which we know is a factor in many modern diseases.
It does sound logical, but this is where the scientific consensus often diverges significantly. Many public health and nutrition experts actually disagree with the idea that omega 6s are inherently pro-inflammatory. In fact, some more recent studies, particularly those looking at direct blood biomarkers, rather than just dietary surveys, have shown that higher levels of linoleic acid in the body were actually linked to lower inflammation and improved cardiometabolic health outcomes.
That's a huge distinction, and it directly challenges the foundational premise of the anti seed oil movement. So, we're not just talking about a neutral effect. Some research is suggesting an anti inflammatory effect from linoleic acid itself, which is quite surprising given the popular narrative. It sounds like the complexity lies in how these fatty acids interact within the broader dietary context, rather than just isolating one.
Precisely. Experts emphasize that while both omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids are crucial, the problem isn't necessarily omega 6s themselves, but rather an overall dietary pattern that might be high in omega 6s times without sufficient omega 3s to balance them, or simply a diet that's generally unhealthy with lots of processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates, which are much more likely culprits for inflammation. It's not just about the ratio, but also the absolute amounts and the overall quality of your diet.
That makes sense. It's rarely one isolated nutrient, but rather the symphony of everything we consume. Another major point of concern raised by seed oil critics, and one that seems quite intuitive, is the concept of oxidative stability. They argue that the high degree of unsaturation in seed oils makes them inherently more vulnerable to oxidation, especially when exposed to high heat during cooking or processing, potentially forming harmful free radicals and toxic compounds.
This is indeed a valid scientific principle. Polyunsaturated fats are more prone to oxidation than saturated or monounsaturated fats. And the critics are right to point out that many common seed oils are refined using high heat and chemical solvents like hexane. They claim this process degrades the nutritional quality, removes natural antioxidants that would otherwise protect the oil, and can even create undesirable trans fats.
So, the industrial processing itself is seen as a key part of the problem, essentially creating an inferior product that is more susceptible to going rancid or producing harmful compounds. It's a persuasive point because it taps into concerns about modern food production and how far removed it is from traditional methods of preparing food.
It certainly does. However, the scientific perspective often counters this by explaining that while PUFAs are more prone to oxidation, seed oils also contain natural antioxidants, like vitamin E, which actually help protect against oxidative stress. Studies have even shown that consuming seed oils can increase vitamin E intake, which helps combat oxidative stress in the body rather than promoting it, which is a key nuance often missed in the debate.
That's a critical piece of information. It's not just about the inherent vulnerability of the fat, but also about the protective compounds naturally present within the oil itself. And what about the refining process creating trans fats? That's a significant concern for many health-conscious consumers.
Yes, the deodorization step, which is a final stage in refining all vegetable oils, can indeed produce very low levels of trans fats. However, modern processing methods have been significantly modified to limit this. We're talking about levels that are generally considered negligible in the context of an overall diet, certainly not comparable to the industrially produced trans fats that were common in partially hydrogenated oils decades ago and are now widely banned or restricted.
That's an important distinction to make because when people hear trans fats, they often think of those highly detrimental fats that we've worked so hard to remove from our food supply. It seems like the reality of modern seed oil processing is far more nuanced than the blanket condemnation suggests. And for cooking, especially high heat cooking, what factors are truly important regarding oxidative stability?
For cooking, two main factors come into play: the oil's smoke point and its fatty acid composition. Oils that are high in monounsaturated fatty acids, or MUFAs, like high oleic sunflower oil, are generally more stable and resistant to oxidation at high temperatures than those high in PUFAs. This is why you see different recommendations for different types of oils in various cooking applications. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer for seed oils.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like we need to get more specific than just lumping all seed oils into one category. Let's break down some of the most common ones. First up, canola oil, which I know is a staple in many kitchens and often gets a lot of flack.
Canola oil is a really interesting case because it's quite unique in its fatty acid profile. It's very low in saturated fat, which is generally a good thing, and remarkably high in monounsaturated fat at around 63%, making it similar to olive oil in that respect. Crucially, it also contains a notable amount of polyunsaturated omega-3 fat, about 9 to 11%, and phytosterols, which are plant compounds known to help reduce cholesterol absorption.
So it's not just an omega-6 powerhouse. It actually has a decent amount of omega-3s, which is often overlooked. What do the studies say about its actual health benefits, especially in comparison to, say, butter or other traditional fats?
Extensive research has shown that canola oil can significantly reduce plasma cholesterol levels, particularly LDL, the bad cholesterol, and even improve insulin sensitivity when it replaces saturated fats in the diet. The US FDA has even authorized a qualified health claim stating that consuming about 1.5 tablespoons of canola oil daily may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease due to its unsaturated fat content. Some studies even suggest it may have anti-inflammatory effects.
That's a pretty strong endorsement from a regulatory body suggesting a clear benefit for heart health. But I know a common concern often raised about canola oil relates to its origins as rapeseed oil and genetically modified organisms. Can you address those specific concerns?
You're right. Historically, rapeseed oil, from which canola is derived, contained high levels of erucic acid, which was linked to heart tissue changes. However, modern canola oil is specifically bred to contain less than 2% erucic acid, making it completely safe for consumption, which is a crucial point that critics often ignore. As for GMOs, most canola grown in the US is genetically engineered, which is a concern for some consumers, but organic, non-GMO options are widely available if that's a priority for an individual.
So, the historical concern about erucic acid is largely outdated due to selective breeding, and the GMO aspect can be navigated by consumer choice. And in terms of cooking, how does canola oil perform regarding oxidative stability?
Canola oil actually has pretty good oxidative stability, largely due to its high oleic acid content, which is a monounsaturated fat. This makes it quite versatile and suitable for a variety of cooking methods, from sautéing to baking, without breaking down easily or producing harmful compounds. It's definitely not the unstable, highly reactive oil it's sometimes portrayed to be.
That's good to know. Let's move on to soybean oil, another incredibly prevalent seed oil, especially in packaged foods and restaurants. What's its nutritional profile like?
Soybean oil is indeed one of the most widely consumed seed oils globally. Its typical composition is around 55 to 58% polyunsaturated fat, 22 to 30% monounsaturated fat, and 12 to 15% saturated fat. It's a significant source of linoleic acid, the omega-6 we discussed, but it also contains a notable amount of omega-3 fatty acids, about 7.2%, which is often overlooked.
So, like canola, it's not exclusively omega 6, which is an important nuance. What are the established health benefits or recommendations for soybean oil from major health organizations?
Leading health authorities, including the World Health Organization and the American Heart Association, recommend soybean oil as part of a healthy diet. Studies consistently show that replacing saturated and trans fats with the unsaturated fats found in soybean oil can effectively lower LDL cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. The FDA also issued a qualified health claim for soybean oil in 2017, similar to canola, regarding its potential to reduce coronary heart disease risk when replacing saturated fat.
That's a significant endorsement for soybean oil as well, reinforcing the idea that these oils are beneficial when used as replacements for less healthy fats. But I've definitely heard concerns about its high omega 6 content contributing to oxidative stress. Is there any truth to that?
Some studies have indeed suggested that very high levels of omega-6 in soybean oil could theoretically contribute to oxidative stress, but other research contradicts this, indicating that soybean oil ingestion does not actually increase oxidative stress in the body. Again, it often comes down to the overall dietary context and the balance of other antioxidants and fatty acids in the diet. It's not as straightforward this causes that scenario.
So the evidence isn't conclusive on that front, and it's likely heavily dependent on the overall diet, which is a recurring theme here. How does soybean oil stand up to cooking, especially high heat applications, in terms of oxidative stability?
Soybean oil generally has a high smoke point, which makes it suitable for many high-heat cooking methods, including frying. However, because of its relatively high polyunsaturated fat content, it can be more prone to oxidation compared to oils with higher monounsaturated fat content if it's not stored properly or if it's repeatedly heated, such as in deep fryers in fast food establishments. Proper handling and storage are key for maintaining its quality.
Good point about proper storage and use, which applies to all oils, really. Let's move on to sunflower oil, another very common option. I know there are different types of sunflower oil, which can be confusing. Can you clarify that for us?
Yes, sunflower oil comes in three main varieties, and this is where the distinction is crucial for understanding its health impacts and oxidative stability. You have high linoleic sunflower oil, which is high in omega 6 PUFA, mid oleic, often called Nusun, and high oleic sunflower oil, which is predominantly high in monounsaturated fat, with oleic acid making up 70 to 90% of its composition. The type makes a big difference.
So, when people talk about sunflower oil, they might be referring to very different products. For the high oleic variety, which sounds quite similar to olive oil or canola in its MUFA content, what are its specific benefits?
High oleic sunflower oil is fantastic. It has been shown to reduce LDL cholesterol and can even help raise HDL, the good cholesterol, which significantly lowers the risk of heart disease, especially when it's used to replace saturated fats. Like canola and soybean oil, the FDA supports a health claim for oils containing at least 70% oleic acid regarding coronary heart disease reduction. Plus, sunflower oil in general provides a good dose of vitamin E, which is a potent antioxidant.
So, high oleic sunflower oil seems like a really solid choice for heart health and general cooking. What about the concerns? Do they mostly apply to the high linoleic varieties?
Exactly. The concerns primarily apply to the high linoleic or mid oleic varieties, particularly regarding their stability during high heat cooking. These oils, due to their higher PUFA content, may produce more dangerous compounds, like aldehydes, during deep frying at high temperatures. While all oils can produce some aldehydes when heated, studies suggest high linoleic sunflower oil might generate more of these toxic substances than other oils under intense heating conditions.
That's a really important distinction, because someone might hear sunflower oil is bad for frying and not realize there's a much more stable high oleic version. So, for high heat cooking, the high oleic sunflower oil is the clear winner in that category.
Absolutely. High oleic sunflower oil exhibits strong oxidative stability precisely because of its high monounsaturated fat content, making it an excellent choice for high heat cooking and frying. Conversely, the high linoleic sunflower oil is much less stable and generally not recommended for deep frying or prolonged high temperature cooking. It really highlights how crucial it is to differentiate between the types of seed oils being discussed.
This level of detail is exactly what's missing from the broad internet debates. It's not just seed oils good or seed oils bad, it's about specific oils, their composition, and how they're used. Now, one thing that comes up repeatedly in the research, which we've touched on, is the idea of replacing less healthy fats. Can you elaborate on the importance of those baselines and the relative versus absolute risk?
This is absolutely critical, Alex, and it's a point often lost in the noise. Many studies demonstrating the benefits of seed oils highlight that these advantages primarily emerge when they replace less healthy fats in the diet, particularly saturated fats. It's not just about adding seed oils, it's about what they're pushing out of your diet.
So, if someone is already eating a diet low in saturated fat, adding more seed oils might not provide the same magnitude of benefit as someone who is switching from, say, butter and lard to canola or soybean oil.
Exactly. For instance, one study found that substituting just 10 grams of butter per day with an equivalent amount of plant-based oils, including soybean oil, was associated with a significant 17% reduction in total mortality and a 17% reduction in cancer mortality. These are substantial relative risk reductions, showing the power of substitution. The absolute risk reduction might be smaller depending on the baseline risk of the individual, but the direction of effect is consistently positive.
Those are compelling numbers. It really reframes the discussion from are seed oils inherently good to are seed oils better than what I might otherwise be consuming, which is a very different question. And returning to the omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, how does that fit into this idea of baselines and overall dietary patterns?
That ratio is still very important, even if omega 6 essence aren't inherently evil. Studies suggest that while both are essential, a higher ratio, like the one commonly seen in many Western diets, is indeed associated with an increased risk of all-cause mortality, as well as mortality from cancer and cardiovascular disease. For example, a ratio of 4 to 1 has been associated with a 70% decrease in total mortality in patients with a history of myocardial infarction.
So it's not about cutting out all omega 6 seconds, but rather ensuring a better balance, likely by increasing omega 3s. It seems like an anti inflammatory diet then isn't just about reducing omega 6s, but also about increasing omega 3s and reducing saturated fats, among other things.
Precisely. An anti-inflammatory dietary approach aims for a reduced intake of excessive omega-6 est and saturated fatty acids, while simultaneously increasing omega-3s from sources like fatty fish, flax seeds, and walnuts. It's about achieving a healthier balance across the board, not demonizing a single fat type. The complexity of the human diet means we need to look at the whole picture, not just isolated components.
That holistic view is so crucial, but it's often lost in the online debates. Another point that critics often raise, and rightly so, is about study funding. It's natural to be skeptical if industry money is behind research that promotes a product. What have you found regarding the funding of studies on seed oils?
That's a very fair and important question to ask in any scientific discussion. While specific funding details aren't always explicitly detailed in every summary, many studies supporting the benefits of seed oils are funded by reputable independent bodies or academic institutions. For instance, research on omega-6 fatty acids and inflammatory markers often uses data from large, long-term observational studies like the Framingham Offspring Study, which is funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of Health.
So, it's not exclusively industry funded research. That's an important clarification, as the narrative often suggests a conspiracy where all positive research is bought and paid for by big food.
Exactly. While industry groups like the International Food Information Council, IFIC, do conduct surveys and research related to public perception of seed oils, the foundational scientific evidence often comes from broader public health research initiatives and academic studies, which aim for scientific rigor and impartiality. It's always wise to check funding sources, but it's equally important not to dismiss all research simply because it doesn't align with a pre-existing bias.
That's a very balanced perspective. Now, to truly understand this debate, we need to try to steelman both sides. For listeners unfamiliar, steelmanning means presenting the strongest possible version of an opponent's argument, even if you disagree with it. So, let's steelman the anti seed oil argument. What's the strongest, most scientifically defensible version of their claims?
The strongest argument against widely consumed industrial seed oils centers on the potential for an imbalanced omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which could indeed contribute to chronic low-grade inflammation, especially within a diet already rich in processed foods, sugars, and refined carbohydrates. It's not about linoleic acid being inherently toxic, but about its overabundance relative to omega-3s in modern diets, potentially shifting the body's inflammatory balance.
That's a good framing. And they also have a strong point about the processing, right?
Yes, absolutely. The argument also strongly highlights legitimate concerns about the industrial refining processes that utilize high heat and chemical solvents like hexane. These processes can potentially degrade the oils, strip away some natural antioxidants, and create harmful oxidative byproducts, especially when these oils are repeatedly heated, as is common in many fast food frying operations. The critics emphasize that our ancestral diets had a much lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, suggesting a mismatch with modern consumption patterns.
That's a solid, nuanced steelman of the anti seed oil position, acknowledging the validity of some of their underlying concerns without necessarily endorsing the more extreme conclusions. Now, let's steelman the pro seed oil argument. What's the most robust case for including these oils in our diet?
The strongest argument in favor of seed oils is their established role as excellent sources of essential polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. When these oils are used to replace saturated and trans fats in the diet, they consistently demonstrate significant benefits for cardiovascular health, including effectively reducing bad LDL cholesterol and substantially lowering the risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. This is backed by decades of robust epidemiological and intervention studies.
And what about the inflammation claim that the anti seed oil camp focuses on? How does the pro seed oil side address that specifically?
Many seed oils contain beneficial compounds like vitamin E, which acts as an important antioxidant, helping to protect against oxidative stress. Furthermore, as we discussed, recent studies using direct biomarkers actually show that linoleic acid may be associated with lower inflammatory markers, directly challenging the notion that it's inherently pro-inflammatory. Modern science and regulatory bodies like the FDA generally recognize these oils as safe and healthy when consumed as part of a balanced diet.
So the argument is that the health benefits are well established. The inflammation claims are largely overblown or misinterpret the science, and concerns about processing are mitigated by modern techniques and the fact that the benefits often outweigh theoretical risks. It really boils down to what you're replacing in your diet.
Exactly. The core message from nutrition science is that these oils are beneficial, not just neutral, when they displace less healthy fats. The trace amounts of processing byproducts or trans fats are generally considered negligible in the context of the substantial cardiovascular benefits they provide. It's a pragmatic approach based on the totality of evidence rather than focusing on isolated theoretical harms.
This has been incredibly insightful, Maya. It really highlights how complex nutrition science is and how easily it can be distorted or oversimplified in the digital age. So, what's the key takeaway for our listeners who are navigating this seed oil food fight and just want to make healthy choices for themselves and their families?
The key takeaway is that the seed oil food fight online is indeed characterized by strong opinions and often oversimplified scientific interpretations. While it's true that an imbalance in the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, prevalent in many Western diets, is a legitimate concern for overall health and inflammation, the research also indicates that linoleic acid from seed oils is not inherently pro-inflammatory and can offer significant cardiometabolic benefits when replacing saturated fats.
So, it's not about avoiding all seed oils, but rather being mindful of the overall dietary pattern and making smart substitutions. And what about the oxidative stability concerns for home cooks?
Oxidative stability is a valid consideration, especially with high heat cooking and repeated use in commercial settings. However, the natural antioxidants present in many seed oils, along with the development of more stable varieties like high oleic sunflower oil, effectively help to mitigate these risks. For home cooking, using oils appropriately for their smoke point and not repeatedly reusing them is generally sufficient.
So, a high oleic sunflower or canola oil for frying, and maybe olive oil for lower heat cooking or dressings, would be a reasonable approach.
That's a perfectly reasonable and evidence-based approach. The overarching message from nutrition scientists is that the overall dietary pattern, including the type of fats consumed and the balance of essential fatty acids, is far more impactful than demonizing a single ingredient. Replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats from sources like canola, soybean, and high oleic sunflower oils within a balanced diet rich in whole foods is generally considered a healthy and beneficial choice for most people.
It sounds like the internet's most controversial food fight, when examined through a scientific lens, reveals a much more nuanced and less alarming picture than the influencers would have us believe. It's about context, balance, and what you're swapping out, not just what you're adding in. Thank you, Maya, for cutting through the noise and bringing some much needed clarity to this complex topic.
My pleasure, Alex. It's been a fascinating deep dive, and hopefully it helps our listeners make more informed choices without getting caught up in the online hysteria.